Exactly 70 years ago, the United States, under President Harry Truman, became the first nation to recognize the State of Israel. Today, we officially opened the United States Embassy in Jerusalem. Congratulations. It's been a long time coming. Almost immediately after declaring statehood in 1948, Israel designated the city of Jerusalem as its capital. The capital the Jewish people established in ancient times. So important. Today, Jerusalem is the seat of Israel's government. It is the home of the Israeli legislature and the Israeli Supreme Court and Israel's prime minister and president. Israel is a sovereign nation with the right, like every other sovereign nation, to determine its own capital. Yet for many years, we failed to acknowledge the obvious, the plain reality that Israel's capital is Jerusalem. On December 6, 2017, at my direction, the United States finally and officially recognized Jerusalem as the true capital of Israel. Today, we follow through on this recognition and open our embassy in the historic and sacred land of Jerusalem. And we're opening it many, many years ahead of schedule. As I said in December, our greatest hope is for peace. The United States remains fully committed to facilitating a lasting peace agreement, and we continue to support the status quo at Jerusalem's holy sites, including at the Temple Mount, also known as Haram al-Sharif. This city and its entire nation is a testament to the unbreakable spirit of the Jewish people. The United States will always be a great friend of Israel and a partner in the cause of freedom and peace. We wish Ambassador Friedman good luck as he takes up his office in this beautiful Jerusalem embassy, and we extend a hand in friendship to Israel, the Palestinians, and to all of their neighbors. May there be peace. May God bless this embassy. May God bless all who serve there. And may God bless the United States of America. Thank you. Have a fantastic day.
Crowds on this side of the border cheer as young men and boys rip down the fence that separates Gaza from Israel and drag it further onto their side. This is the largest protest in recent memory, and there aren't enough ambulances to carry out all the dead or injured. The smoke you see behind me is mostly from tires that are burning, and protesters say they're burning tires in order to mask themselves as they move forward, trying to take down bits of the fence. Despite the dangers, the crowd continues to grow throughout the day, and tear gas is lobbed over the border or dropped out of drones. Today's the day the U.S. Embassy in Jerusalem is opening, and this protest is largely in response to that. Later in the day, large blasts are heard near security sites further into Gaza, and Palestinian authorities ask civilians to disperse. And protests are expected to continue over the next few days. Reporting from Gaza, I'm Heather Murdoch, VOA News.
Officials in Gaza say that Israeli forces have shot dead at least 41 protesters and injured 1,800 others in the deadliest day of clashes since the 2014 Gaza war. The violence came as the United States opened its controversial new embassy in Jerusalem, a move which has infuriated Palestinians. Israel's Prime Minister Netanyahu said it was a glorious day, and he thanked President Trump for making history. Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas said the move meant the US had cancelled its role in the peace process and insulted the world and the Palestinian people. Richard Galpin has this report.
A drone flying above the Gaza border drops tear gas canisters on thousands of Palestinian protesters below. This, the latest in a series of demonstrations recently, has been particularly angry. Palestinians here outraged by the opening of the United States Embassy in Jerusalem. This protester says Gaza and the West Bank will rise up. Everyone, he says, including children and women. No one will stay at home. And there have been hundreds of casualties as Israeli forces have opened fire using live ammunition. Palestinian health officials say more than 40 people have been killed. The Israelis say they opened fire to stop any Palestinians crossing the border from Gaza into Israel.
Thank you all. And of course, I want to especially welcome Jared Kushner and Ivanka Trump. Your presence here today is a testament to the importance of this occasion, not only for the Trump administration, but in a very personal way, for you. For you, each of you, for the pursuit of peace, and for President Trump himself. Thank you. Dear friends, what a glorious day. Remember this moment. This is history. President Trump, by recognizing history, you have made history. So for me, this spot brings back personal memories, but for our people, it evokes profound collective memories of the greatest moments we have known on this city on a hill. In Jerusalem, Abram passed the greatest test of faith and the right to be the father of our nation. In Jerusalem, King David established our capital 3,000 years ago. In Jerusalem, King Solomon built our temple, which stood for many centuries. In Jerusalem, Jewish exiles from Babylon rebuilt the temple, which stood for many more centuries. In Jerusalem, the Maccabees rededicated that temple and restored Jewish sovereignty in this land. And it was here in Jerusalem, some 2,000 years later, that the soldiers of Israel spoke three immortal words: Har Habayit Be'adenu, the Temple Mount is in our hands. Words that lifted the spirit of the entire nation. We are in Jerusalem and we are here to stay.
The Kingdom of Saudi Arabia is known for its great wealth. Blessed with massive oil reserves, the Saudis have built a society with the lavish trappings of wealth vividly on display. However, this is a facade that hides the failings of a state racked by poverty and social injustice.
Riyadh, a bustling, modern city of more than 6 million people. Saudi Arabia is a key U.S. ally in the Middle East and the world's largest oil exporter. Its state oil company is worth an estimated $10 trillion. The face of the new king, Salman, looms large over the streets. A single family, the House of Saud, has ruled the country since its founding.
Saudi Arabia is an absolute monarchy ruled by the House of Saud since its inception in 1932. It is governed by a strict interpretation of Islamic Sharia law. Their fundamentalist Wahhabi interpretation of Islam, a Sunni Islamic movement that seeks to purify Islam of any innovations and practices that deviate from the 7th century teachings of the Prophet Muhammad and his companions, leads to rampant human rights violations across their entire society. Significantly, they are the only nation in existence in 1948 that has not embraced the principles of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the most widely accepted human rights statement in history. Perhaps the most repressed portion of Saudi society is their women. Women in Saudi Arabia face a litany of repressive policies that restrict their freedom of movement, subject them to random violence at the hands of men, and severely hinder their opportunities to advance in Saudi society.
Women are banned from driving and are often prevented from traveling and going to the doctors without a male guardian. Activists have been sharing videos like this of public violence against women to raise awareness about the issue. Saudi officials have said they don't condone such violence and take these incidents seriously.
Violence in Saudi society, however, is not limited to women. The Saudi regime routinely takes part in capital punishment using such brutal methods such as beheadings and stonings. Saudi's religious police are empowered to execute individuals in public and do not hesitate to do so. The headless bodies of those who have been executed are often displayed publicly to serve as a reminder of government authority. The Saudi government is also responsible for violently repressing political dissent. Starting in 2012 during the Arab Spring, the Shia minority rose up in the oil-rich east of Saudi Arabia. Despite the resources of the east, the region had largely been left behind economically. Clamoring for political reform, the people took to the streets in great numbers. The government responded to what they deemed a terrorist threat with military force. The Saudi government is blatantly responsible for heinous human rights violations. Despite this, the West generally hails the regime as a key ally in the region. Billions of dollars in weapons and aid are given to Saudi Arabia annually. This aid has done nothing but embolden the regime and solidified their disregard for international human rights standards. It is time for the civilized world to drop its double standard and expose the fact that behind its facade of modern opulence, the House of Saud is a repressive kingdom built on sand.
First 6 months of 2015, Saudi Arabia beheaded on average one prisoner every other day. The country has one of the highest execution rates in the world and is still the only one still regularly performing public beheadings. This practice has been widely condemned and is considered a severe violation of human rights. So why is Saudi Arabia executing so many people? Well, Saudi Arabia is an Islamic theocracy, which means that they follow Islamic law known as Sharia. Within Sharia law, one can be put to death for any number of non-lethal or lethal crimes, including religious offenses like blasphemy or witchcraft. While sometimes executions are done by firing squad or stoning, beheadings are much more common, and occasionally the beheaded body is crucified. A gang leader was beheaded and publicly crucified for 3 days after robbing a jewelry store. Although most executions are public, there are no announcements in advance, and spectators are not allowed to photograph or videotape them. In 2015, Saudi Arabia increased the number of executions dramatically. Some have attributed this to instability in the region, to show that they are not afraid of doling out capital punishment. According to Sharia law found in the Quran, there are 3 major criminal categories for which capital punishment can be imposed. The first is based on specific crimes and punishments found in the Quran called hudud, and considered crimes against God. This includes adultery, converting to another religion, and homosexual behavior. Murder is not included in this category and is instead seen as a personal dispute. Crimes like those fall into qisas category, meaning retaliatory, any eye for an eye type crime. Any bodily injury or attack is included in this category, and since the crime is considered a dispute in Saudi Arabia, it is possible for a murderer to pay blood money to a victim's family to avoid prosecution. In 2013, a man who stabbed another man in the back was sentenced by a court to have his spinal cord severed unless he paid more than $250,000 to his victim. The final category is called tazir and covers pretty much all other crimes. The punishment is left to the judgment of the court, although it may still be based in scripture. Everything from rape to witchcraft to drug smuggling falls into tazir, and those found guilty can be executed for fairly benign offenses. The last execution for sorcery, for example, occurred as recently as 2014. Saudi Arabia doesn't just execute its own citizens, but also kills a huge number of foreigners from developing countries. Often they are convicted of drug smuggling and are unable to defend themselves. However, it is reported that no Westerners have ever been executed in Saudi Arabia. In recent years, Saudi Arabia has been compared to the brutal terrorist group ISIS. Saudi officials have defended the executions, saying that they are the result of due process. Still, many point out that the ideology and religious interpretation of criminal activity is relatively identical between the two. Unfortunately, Saudi Arabia's massive level of global influence makes it difficult for the international community to force them to stop.
We are here merely saying to you, look, there's a better way of life. You do not need to live like animals, following your own desires. The big industries you see nowadays in the West are things like gambling, pornography, alcohol, drugs, homosexuality.
If you took over Britain, you'd ban alcohol.
Of course, alcohol will be banned, drugs will be banned, pornography will be banned, gambling will be banned. But the money saved, there will be no monarchy.
La ilaha illallah! La ilaha illallah! Muhammadur Rasulullah! Muhammadur Rasulullah! La ilaha illallah! La ilaha illallah! Muhammadur Rasulullah! Muhammadur Rasulullah! There's none worthy of worship except Allah! There's none worthy of worship except Allah! Muhammad is his messenger!
I don't think any person with those views, no matter what colour, race or religion he has the right to speak them on the street. If I came out with half of what he said about beheading people, etc., etc., I would be arrested for incitement.
We are not a military organisation in this country. We're out there to engage people in confrontation. We're not planning any kind of operations. If we were doing so, you would not see us out open publicly. But that does not mean that we do not believe in the eradication of man-made law and supremacy and sovereignty only for God. And the way the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ eradicated the non-Islamic law from the Arabian Peninsula, we hope one day to eradicate Islamic law from Britain, with the generations to come from the rest of the world, to fulfill the prophecy of the Prophet that the whole of the world will one day be under the authority of the Muslims.
First of all, I believe that the British people, they are very ignorant about the fact what is happening abroad, even about Sheikh Osama. If they came to actually verify with us rather than show an ugly face and be angry with us, they would find that Islam is truly something they like.
Leith is honest. He's not. Yes, he is.
Leith
is honest.
He is an adherent
to the Islamic
He's an
extreme Muslim.
No, he's a Muslim.
No, he's a pure Muslim. He adheres to the Islamic text completely. What does he do that is wrong in your eyes?
I've spoken to many of my colleagues, for instance, at work. One incident was about the Sharia, where they were saying that he was telling me how barbaric chopping the hands of the thief was. And 2 weeks later, his laptop was actually stolen. And he came to me and said, I feel like killing the man, chopping his head off. I said, for God's sake, all we said is chop the hands off. Don't go chopping the man's head off.
Shall I take you to the training camp?
Yeah.
Where we're doing kind of like Al-Qaeda training. and we're making like nuclear weapons. Yeah, well, maybe I'm doing that in my garden. Who knows?
The football
It may well be. Yeah. I think there might be a bunker underneath, Whitechapel Mosque. Maybe we need to dig it up and have a look.
Yeah.
You don't want to believe everything that you see and you read in the media. One of the problems with the media is that they'll fabricate something and then they'll start believing it. You see, so that's quite dangerous, really. You invent Frankenstein and Dracula, and then you start to become afraid of it, forgetting the fact that you invented him in the first place.
Somebody else. So let me ask you a question. Look, all I'm saying is, with the word of Jesus, it's the word of Jesus.
My name's Abu Sumayya from Stoke-on-Trent. I become Muslim about 5 years ago now, March the 5th, 2005. Basically, whatever Allah has given for us, we're going to take. If Allah tells us that we lash the person who doesn't pray his prayer, we lash the person who doesn't pray his prayer. If he tells us we stone the adulterer, we stone the adulterer, only because our Lord told us to. That's all. Whatever our Lord told us, we follow.
Assalamu alaikum. We're gonna eat downstairs, but I've got some crew with me. You don't mind it?
Have you seen this one? What does it say? That's the American major in the army who turned on his colleagues.
Well, I don't think he went crazy. I think what he did, he woke up to his reality really as a Muslim, and he realised that, in fact, his so-called fellow comrades were going and occupying Muslim land, killing innocent men, women and children. And it's something that he could not handle, really, and he realised, I think, that he has a responsibility. And he probably did what I think many other people may do within the US Army and the British Army even, if they continue with their foreign policy. It's a very severe lesson for the British and the Americans in Afghanistan, that the Afghan police are killing them, and even their own comrades are killing them. So, they need to pull out. They cannot possibly win. I don't feel sorry at all for the non-Muslims, because Allah said in the Quran, He said, فَلَا تَأْسَ عَلَى الْقَوْمِ الْكَافِرِينَ. He said, don't feel sorry for the non-Muslims. Allah destined for them not to embrace Islam. He destined for them to die as non-Muslims. He destined for them to go to the hellfire. So why should I feel sorry for people, who ended up like that?
Religious intolerance in Israel and the Palestinian autonomy has found a common target: Christianity. Extremist Muslims and Jews are turning increasingly violent towards Christians and their holy sites. Artis Paulus Lear meets those being persecuted for their faith in the Holy Land.
David Ortiz lives dangerously. A Christian pastor among religious Jews in the West Bank city of Ariel, he's received death threats for trying to convert Jews and Muslims to his faith.
My first time going into a Muslim village, I got beat up. We were giving our Bibles.
Someone hated Ortiz enough to drop off a package at his house. Thinking it had candy inside, his 15-year-old son opened it. The pipe bomb nearly killed him.
And it blew him into the kitchen. And it made a hole in his chest. Most of the thrusts went this way, but the backfire destroyed the refrigerator and everything in back.
It took 3 years for Israeli police to catch the perpetrator, a religious Jew, Jack Taital, who lived in a nearby Israeli settlement. He'd already killed 2 Arabs.
And he says he's very proud. And he says he did God a favor by trying to kill us.
Across the West Bank, the story for Palestinian Christians is as bleak, and the threat comes from both extremist Jews and Muslims. Bethlehem, the believed birthplace of Christ, once boasted a population of 85% Christian. Today, less than 10% live here. This woman's afraid to show her face. She used to go to Manja Square and teach about Jesus, but all that ended after her house was nearly burnt down.
I didn't feel like I belong to this place anymore. I feel like I'm a stranger.
Given the opportunity, she says, she wouldn't think twice about leaving.
The explosion of Muslims is you feel they're controlling everywhere, everything. My granddaughter have to memorize the Quran.
But Tas Abu Sada ignores the threats. He's one of a growing number of Muslims who's converted to Christianity in recent years.
When I was a fighter with Arafat, I hated Christians just as much as I hated Jews. I was going around Jordan looking for their homes and throw hand grenades into their homes or shooting up their cars because I believed Christians are spies to Israel.
But Christianity can sit alongside Islam and Judaism here. These two Palestinian brothers have no problem reconciling their Christian faith with living in a Jewish state. They've volunteered to join the country's army, saying they feel as Israeli as their Jewish and Arab counterparts.
I'll give everything I have for this army, because in the end, this is my country.
But it's not without its problems.
Each time I go home in uniform, someone will call at me traitor and things like that. It doesn't influence me.
But in recent months, attacks against Christians and Christian sites have increased. At the beginning of November, this 100-year-old church was burnt by right-wing Israelis who broke some of the windows and threw Molotov cocktails inside. It's no wonder that Christians here are feeling under fire. Paul Islia, RT, Jerusalem.